Hello, this is Ben with Mission Cloud Services, and today we are going to go over enabling VPC flow logs in your AWS account. The way we're doing it for demonstration purposes is enabling VPC flow logs for a single VPC in a single account and the VPC itself. What you'll see if you read the documentation is that you can create a flow log at the VPC level, you can create it at the subnet level, or you can create it at the network interface level. And if you do create it for subnet or VPC, each network interface in that subnet or VPC is monitored. Why would you want to turn on VPC flow logs? It's just kind of a best security practice for one thing, and another thing, it also helps you troubleshoot. So you can diagnose overly restrictive security group rules, monitor traffic that's going to your instance and coming out of your instance, and determine direction of traffic to and from the network interfaces. As for some of the basics of how the flow log works, when you want to create it, you just need to specify the resource for the flow log, the type of traffic to capture. You can choose between accepted, rejected, or all, and the destination where you want to publish it. You have several options of where you can publish the flow log data. Uh, Typically, it's going to go to an S3 bucket or CloudWatch logs, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. In the first example here, we have AWS region VPC AZ down into a private subnet with an EC2 instance that has an ENI attached to it. We've created a flow log for that, and it gets pushed to an S3 bucket. In this next one, which is the one that we'll do, the flow log comes from the ENIs on the EC2, and it gets published to CloudWatch logs. So in the next video, we will go into actually creating our first VPC flow log. Okay, so now we understand the basics of why we would want flow logs and what they're useful for. Let's actually get into how to do that and where we want to publish them. For the demonstration purposes, I'm going to publish them to CloudWatch logs. As we discussed in the previous section, you can also publish them to S3 and Kinesis. When you publish them to S3, it's going to be a little bit cheaper, but they will be a little bit harder to use. When you publish them to CloudWatch logs, they're easy to read and easy to access, and that's why we're going to do it that way. It's just a little bit more expensive than publishing them to S3. I'll have the pricing information for the different options at the very end of the video. So there are some prerequisites for publishing your flow logs to CloudWatch logs. You have to have an IAM role that allows you to publish to CloudWatch logs. I've already done that before the video, and I'm just going to show you here in the documentation the type of policy you would need, and then you create a role and you attach the policy to that role, and you have to have the proper trust relationship. I don't want to go through that in the video directly because it's going to be a little bit more time consuming. Just know you can find this information in the user guide for the VPC when you're looking at flow logs and how to publish them to CloudWatch. It's pretty straightforward, and the directions are great. So let's go into the console. Once we're in the console, we can select VPC and make sure you're in the region that you want to be in. Now I've got two VPCs. I'm just going to use the default VPC for the demonstration. You can know if you're in the default VPC by clicking on it. It'll say default VPC, yes or no. So my top one's not, my bottom one here is. Once you've selected it, there's a tab for flow logs. I already have one created so that we don't have to wait to look at some of the output. I created that a little while ago so that we can actually go into CloudWatch and look at some of the logs that already exist because they don't actually show up right away. And you'll see that in just a moment. So now we'll name this demo flow log version 2. Got to give everything a name. So we talked about this in the beginning of the video, the type of traffic you want to capture. If you only want to look at maybe reject traffic because you're trying to troubleshoot something that can't talk where it's supposed to be able to talk, you could just do one for reject. And there's no real limit on the type of flow logs you set up. You can have multiple flow logs for multiple purposes. Generally, though, you can just leave it as all, and you're going to get all traffic to and from all network interfaces in that VPC. Maximum aggregation interval. If you leave it at 10 minutes, it's basically just saying that your flow logs will show up every 10 minutes. If you do it at 1 minute, you're going to get more logs, and it's going to cost a little bit more. Destination, send to CloudWatch logs, send to an S3 bucket, and then the Kinesis options. You have to have created the log group ahead of time. So I've already done this. AWS Flow Logs, all you have to do is go into CloudWatch and create a log group. That's in the documentation as well and very simple. IAM role, you also have to have done this ahead of time. I've already done that. And then the format. The format's interesting. The default format will usually get you what you need. You're going to see the version, account ID, interface ID. This is the ENI that maybe you're looking at in a particular record. Source address, destination address, source and destination port, protocol like 443 or 80, packets, bytes, start, end, action, and log status. Now that we have all the information we need, we can click on Create Flow Log and it will create that for us. So now we're going to have two flow logs, the one I made initially for the demo and then the second one that we just created. I ended up having to publish them to two different CloudWatch log groups because you can't actually publish a VPC flow log to the same log group, so we have to have two for the demo. But now you can see once you click into your VPC, you have your flow logs tab and we have our flow logs located here. It will link directly to those logs in CloudWatch, but if we manually click over to CloudWatch and look at our log groups, now we can see where these things live. So I created these. Some of these are created automatically by AWS. I created these and just used the same naming convention. So if you wanted to create your own log group when you're doing this, you could just name it as such. Retention matters because you do pay for the storage of CloudWatch logs. So keep that in mind when you're setting your retention period on these. 10 years is a long time. That'll add up pretty quickly. So keep that in mind. But to actually look at the logs, the first set of flow logs I created was here. And you'll get various streams based on the Elastic Network interfaces that live in the VPC. So here we can go in and look at some actual network traffic that was occurring from my instance to the internet and out and back in. And when you're looking at these flow logs and trying to make sense of it, if you need to go back and consult the documentation, it can be fairly helpful. So you can look at these flow log record examples. So for this example, we could see it's telling us SSH traffic port 22 to this ENI, and this account was allowed. So where do we find these things? Port 22, that's listed right here. The ENI, that's right here. The account is in the beginning over here. And then the accept message at the end is what tells us that this traffic made it to its destination. In the next example, we have RDP traffic, port 3389. That's right here. ENI is over here again. Account, and that was rejected. Your accept or reject messages will always be at the end, and in the middle you have your source and destination IPs, ports, protocols, your ENIs towards the beginning, and your account number as well as the version. The last quick thing we'll talk about today is the pricing for your VPC flow logs. If you want to find that information, you can go to the AWS CloudWatch pricing page. We're going to scroll down a little bit, skip past the free tier, get into the paid tier. You want to select logs, and then we'll scroll a little bit further to vended logs. So you have the options to deliver your VPC flow logs to CloudWatch logs, S3, and Kinesis, as we discovered when we were going through the walkthrough. It's 50 cents per gigabyte for the first 10 terabytes to CloudWatch logs like we did. It's about half the price to go to S3 or Kinesis, and that's just because there's a little bit more work to do when you deliver to those destinations as opposed to CloudWatch logs. It's right there in the UI, and you can look at them right away and make good use of them immediately. And it's just a little bit more work once you deliver them to S3 or Kinesis. So that is all we have today for enabling VPC flow logs. This is Ben with Mission Cloud Services. Thank you and have a great day.